So welcome today, everybody, to our Fertility in the Workplace virtual boardroom that is being facilitated by HR Recruit and Vista Employer Services. My name is Jo Thompson and I'm a consultant for HR Recruit. I'm joined today by Yvonne Saxon from Vista, who will introduce herself shortly. Yvonne is going to discuss the challenges faced around fertility and look at some practical ways to support those affected. If you do have any burning questions during the session, then please put them into the chat box facility and we will cover them at the end. The event was originally scheduled for an hour. However, it is more likely to last for 30 to 40 minutes. So we will have time to cover off any questions if anyone does have any. I'm now going to hand you over to Yvonne, who will introduce herself and start the session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jo. Thanks again for inviting me today. And it's great to see so much interest in what is a highly sensitive, but unfortunately increasingly common issue. A quick intro about me. I've worked in HR for an awful long time. I first started getting involved with the inclusion agenda back in 2005. And since then, my interest in the subject's grown. I also have a personal interest in fertility issues at work, because I do have a granddaughter who was born as a result of IVF. And so this is a subject that's quite close to my heart. So I'll share my screen with you. Just bear with me while we get this up. And you should be able to see that now.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, good. Okay. So around 1 in 6 couple in the UK are going to have difficulties conceiving. And that means that it's likely that at least 16% of the workforce are going to be affected by fertility issues. So that's a significant number of people who are going to be experiencing very difficult challenges that will impact their physical and their mental health. Now, most people don't want to tell their employers or their colleagues about this. And in fact, many don't even share it with their family or their friends. It's such a sensitive subject. However, at some point, their struggles are going to affect or be affected by their work. So let's start off looking at the medical and the legal context around this from a workplace perspective. And surprisingly, despite the World Health Organization classifying infertility as a disease of the reproductive system, fertility isn't actually viewed to be a necessary medical treatment in England and Wales. And in the UK, there is no legal right to time off work for fertility treatments or to accommodate injections or sample collections or anything like that. And from a legal perspective, it's only once an embryo has been implanted that statutory maternity rights kick in. But those actually vanish 2 weeks after any confirmation that a transfer has been unsuccessful, or if unfortunately a confirmed pregnancy is then lost before 24 weeks. So for people who are facing this issue, there's not a lot there from a legal perspective to support them. They also face many other hurdles, and the road to achieving pregnancy is long and it's complex and it's very often misunderstood. So firstly, couples have to had to try to conceive for at least a year before they can access any investigations on the NHS, never mind any treatment. Same-sex couples and single people, trans people also have lots of other hurdles to overcome before they can be considered for assisted conception. And the investigations to establish the cause of any problem with conception can be drawn out over many months or even years. And it's not always possible for people to get appointments that can be arranged to fit in with their working lives. Accessing treatment on the NHS is a bit of a postcode lottery. It varies considerably depending on the health authority policy in an area. So, for example, in Manchester, where my daughter had her treatment, only one cycle of IVF was funded by the NHS. But in central London, 3 cycles are funded. So it feels very unfair, but that's how it is. And there seems to be some efforts being made now to try and level up this access. But as it stands at the moment, it depends where people live in the country. The NHS policies also vary on the age of patients and whether somebody has already got a child or not in order to qualify for treatment. And going private is a very expensive option. It costs around about £10,000 each time. And that's also a bit of a gamble because the success rate is only around about 50%. And that's for those who are aged under 35. And that reduces with age. So the typical fertility investigations that have to take place before any treatment, it very much depends on how long people are going to have to wait, depends on where they live. And those investigations are typically going to involve physical examinations, they'll involve blood tests, semen samples, scans, and cameras being inserted to visualize reproductive organs. So all quite intrusive stuff. And these can take a long time with various waits in between different investigations taking place. So I'll just move on now to more of a personal story. And this is Toby Trice. Toby and his wife went through 7 years of tests and treatments, which Toby describes as horrendous. And this led to him suffering from depression. Now, getting involved with motorsport was Toby's way of escaping these pressures. And Toby now uses the sport as a platform for raising awareness about infertility. Now, unfortunately, in Toby's case, the focus on tests and treatment was very much on his wife. And there was no indication that IVF could not work for them. And they had 2 failed rounds of IVF. And one day somebody suggested to Toby a test and a procedure that wasn't available on the NHS. And it actually turned out that he had an undiagnosed physical problem, which damaged his sperm. And there was actually a really simple treatment, which he then had, and that led to him and his wife falling pregnant naturally. So he'd gone through 7 years of all these investigations and treatments to find out that it was something actually very, very simple, because quite often the focus is more on the woman and the man. And I've heard Toby speak about his experience and the awkwardness about booking time off from work to go and produce samples, because he didn't want to have to tell anyone, A, about their inability to have a child, and B, the fact that he wanted the time off to go and produce a sample. It's, it's a difficult thing sometimes for men to actually, speak to somebody about. So what does IVF treatment involve? So basically, it's during IVF treatment, a woman's going to have to be required to attend a clinic over a period of weeks, and that's going to require time away from work. And those timings are going to be driven by menstrual cycles, any previous results of other investigations, and any embryo development. So those appointments can't really be planned far in advance. They are going to come along in a very ad hoc way. And there's a need for them to take medication, or for injections or samples to be collected from men and women at very, very specific times. So it's hard to say, well, I'd rather have my appointment at this time, please. There's also going to be some days in the cycle when it just won't be possible for the person receiving the treatment to attend work, particularly after egg collection, because that will involve a local or a general anaesthetic or heavy sedation. And sometimes treatment can lead to significant side effects or serious complications. So if we just walk through the slide that you can see in front of you now, if we start at the beginning, starts at the beginning of the menstrual cycle, there's the regular visits taking place to the clinic for blood tests, scans, etc. And then around 35 hours before egg retrieval, an injection is administered, and that is basically to release the eggs. There's admission then to day surgery for the eggs to be retrieved, and there's going to be a need, obviously, for some time off work following that procedure. At that point, the man provides sperm, or a sperm donor is used, and the egg is fertilized. And then the development of those eggs are observed in the laboratory as the embryos grow, and regular updates are given over the phone over the next few days as to how things are going. And then fingers crossed that an embryo or embryos are viable, and after 3 to 5 days, then the embryo are transferred. And then around 2 weeks later, a pregnancy test is done. Now, if the test is negative, then the whole process is going to start again if more than one cycle is being funded. And of course, there will be waits for appointments to start that cycle again. So I'll just look at another personal story. And this is one of the saddest stories that I've heard from people about experiences of fertility problems at work. And it was one that was told by a clinician from a fertility clinic. Now, once an embryo has been fertilized, it's observed each day, and the mother gets those regular updates by phone. And often the news isn't good. And for this particular lady, who I'm calling Hillary, it was the end of the line, as she couldn't get any further treatment on the NHS, and she wasn't in a position to raise the money to go private. Now, Hillary worked on a manufacturing site and had not told her employer about her plans to get pregnant. And the workplace didn't allow people to leave site during their shift. And so she couldn't find anywhere private to take that phone call. And so she went and sat in a cupboard. And when she was given the news that the embryo wasn't viable, Hillary was totally distraught. And she sat in that cupboard for an hour talking to the clinician before she felt able to return to work. So you can see just how difficult these situations can become for people who are trying to face this in the workplace. Alongside those challenges, there are side effects from IVF treatment. And these come from something called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. And those symptoms can range from very mild to severe. And for those unfortunate enough to experience the more serious symptoms, these tend to worsen for a couple of weeks if pregnancy results. And my daughter was in that latter situation, and she ended up with fluid building around her heart and her lungs, and she had to be hospitalised. And as you can imagine, that was really difficult for me, because the baby she desperately wanted was actually the cause of her lying there in a hospital bed. But fortunately, more commonly, nausea and vomiting are the biggest problems that people face with side effects when they're at work. So let's move on to some of the impacts that have actually hit people going through all of this. Some people will become pregnant and then only to lose the pregnancy, and that can happen repeatedly. So they're struggling with that loss at the same time as everything else that they've been through to actually get pregnant in the first place. Men also struggle with the pressures. You know, quite often the focus is very much on women in this and what they're going through, but men are equally struggling. If you think back to Toby, who I mentioned earlier on, and the depression that he ended up experiencing. And there's a high embarrassment factor, as I said, for a lot of men about the need for this time off to provide samples. And for same-sex couples or single people or trans people, they experience lots of difficulties in very unique situations. Surrogacy and artificial insemination aren't funded by the NHS, and they come with very complex emotional and legal issues to be navigated, which are no less stressful than the issues that people physically face when they're going through IVF. So the physical, the emotional, mental, time and financial investments of assisted conception can be absolutely exhausting. And 68% of those undergoing fertility treatment feel that their mental well-being has been impacted. Now, with little clear support in the workplace, over 2/3 of respondents to the Fertility Network's recent survey did not tell their employer about their treatment, and over 1/3 of them actually considered leaving their jobs. So what can we as employers do? And there's actually quite a lot we can do. And a good starting point really would be to develop a fertility policy, because straight away that demonstrates to employees that an employer is going to be understanding and supportive of these issues. Now, I know that a number of organisations mention fertility treatment in their maternity policies. But if we just take a step back from that and think about the things that I've just mentioned in the last few minutes, you can see how that could feel really inappropriate for somebody who is facing fertility treatment and they're having to wade through a maternity policy to get to the information that they're looking for. So if there isn't an intention to have a standalone fertility policy, then it might be better to position it within a well-being policy alongside things like menopause or mental health, etc., just so that it's not put together with that maternity policy. Ideally, any policy it should be supported by awareness training, and that should be in place for HR teams, line managers, and if possible, other employees, just to help an understanding of this being a health issue, and how those experiencing it are affected by it day to day. And you might also want to consider the sensitivities of those experiencing fertility challenges when new mums and dads pop into the workplace unannounced with their babies. I know of one organisation who have come up with an idea where what they do is say, well, if you want to bring them in, but it's only going to be on this particular afternoon of the week. So it's like Wednesday afternoons. And that way, anyone who is going to be sensitive to that issue can kind of either choose to keep out of the way or not. And it's actually probably less distracting all round than babies just kind of appearing, because you know how much time gets taken up when people gather round, etc. Enabling flexibility and time off is absolutely crucial. And while most employers are not going to be able to match the legal entitlements that they've got in Malta, for example. So in Malta, they get 100 hours of leave per couple per cycle of treatment. And most organisations may not be able to match what the Co-op launched last year when they launched an unlimited fertility leave for their employees. But most should be able to make some reasonable provision for some kind of time off and flexibility. Employers can also sign up to the Fertility Workplace Pledge. Now, this is something that was launched by Nikki Aitken, who's an MP, and she is campaigning for better rights in the workplace in relation to fertility. And this is a pledge that employers can sign up to work towards. You don't have to have achieved all these things before you sign up to it. It's just about you pledging to work towards providing an accessible workplace facility policy, providing line managers with training to support those experiencing infertility, and flexible working. So signing up to that pledge and advertising that actually sends out a very strong signal to your workforce and to potential employees about how supportive you are in terms of fertility. Earlier this year, Bupa and Aviva both launched add-on cover for fertility treatment to their private health insurance policies. Now, clearly that's a bolt-on, more expensive option for employers to consider, but some employers might want to consider adding to those benefits for their employees. And because of the rise in infertility, some organisations now are even going as far as paying for fertility treatment for their top performers in order to retain talent. Now, at the moment, that seems to be more American organisations seem to be going that way, but it's something that we're seeing increasingly. And what about line managers? What can they do? And quite simply, one of the most important things that they can do is to be flexible. Treatments vary and they're very individual according to individual circumstances, and they can be changed at very short notice. So for a line manager, it's about finding out what that employee needs and what they can reasonably do to accommodate those needs. Being supportive, checking in with the employee regularly, and reassuring them about work, and making sure that they're reminded of any support that they can access, such as employee assistance programs, or signposting them to any external agencies. And it's important for managers to remember that partners and other family members can be affected by the impacts of these things upon their loved ones, and they may also need support. So be conscious of the enormity of what the employee is experiencing, and it's about being really sensitive and avoid downplaying unsuccessful experiences. Things like saying, oh, well, better luck next time, or telling them the story of the experience of, a cousin of yours or whatever is not likely to be helpful. It goes without saying that any discussions need to be handled sensitively and confidentially. And managers really do need to be aware of the statutory rights that kick in as soon as an embryo has been implanted, because effectively, as soon as that embryo has been implanted, then a woman is classed as being pregnant from a legal perspective. But if that implantation is not successful, then those rights continue until 2 weeks after a negative pregnancy result. So those are all the key things that I wanted to highlight to you. Are there any questions that have come through, Jo?
There's nothing in the. Oh, wait a minute. This one. There's no questions as such. Elaine's just put that what her thoughts were, but she's had to dash. I mean, does anybody want to come off mute and either share their experiences or share anything that you do within your business around this topic? Or has anyone got any questions?
Yep. Okay. Well, we will.
Yvonne, sorry. Is it possible, when you said that once the embryo is planted, obviously the woman is classed as pregnant, well, fingers crossed, but if it was unsuccessful, you said, is it 2 weeks thereafter?
So basically, she's classed as pregnant until 2 weeks after a pregnancy test says it's negative.
Okay.
So basically, the embryo is implanted. There's usually at that point she would be classed as being pregnant. A pregnancy test is usually done 10 to 14 days later, and if that pregnancy test then is negative, then those rights fall away 2 weeks after that. So effectively, that could be a month after implantation.
Okay, thank you.
Yvonne, there's a question come up and it just said, could you repeat the statutory rights element?
So the statutory rights are that an employee, I think we more or less just covered that, but I'll just go back over it again, is there are no statutory rights in relation to fertility treatment, and that's something that Nikki Aiken is really banging on about in Parliament, until an embryo has been transplanted. And so at that point, so when the egg has been fertilized and then has been transplanted into the woman, then she is classified as pregnant from a statutory rights perspective. And as I just said a minute ago, a pregnancy test will then take place 10 to 14 days later. If that pregnancy test is negative, those statutory rights continue for a further 2 weeks. Is that okay?
I think that answers it.
Yeah.
Has anyone got anything else they want to answer or put into the chat box?
I have a question, or not question really, some guidance. So I had 2 employees, same sex, and they had surrogacy situation. Both of them applied for maternity leave. So sorry, we call it maternity, it's like parental leave. So normally, I mean, as far as I understand, it needs to go through a legal process and then adoption process. They will identify one as the mother, one as the father. Mother will be entitled to maternity leave, father will be entitled to parental leave. But in my case, both of them were asking for maternity leave, and because the child was born at that time, I couldn't really know what to do. Luckily, they went for shared parental leave, so it made my life easier. But what do we do in this situation? Because we cannot do anything until the child is born and then adoption is completed. All it was done through a court process.
Yeah, so I think the key thing there, though, is that with surrogacy, there has to be a legal process that has to be completed first. So nobody's really got anything until that legal process has been completed, because in the eyes of the law, a child is belongs to the mother that's given birth to the child. And so, you know, even if a surrogate says, well, yes, I'm going to be a surrogate for you, she could change her mind when that baby's born. She could say, sorry, I'm not handing this baby over. And so nothing, absolutely nothing will happen until that baby is born and those legal processes have been gone through. Now, on the topic of they can't really claim maternity leave in that sense, because the legal rights haven't kicked in there, and there's a lot of complexity. So I wouldn't like to give you a concrete answer on it, because you do need to look quite carefully at the particular circumstances in each individual case. So I can't say that, you know, one person or this person or that person could claim this, that, or the other. What's usually there is what most people will usually claim is statutory shared parental leave. And that's the usual one that I'm most familiar with people claiming when they have gone through a surrogacy and an adoption route. Does that help?
It does help. I mean, I managed to convince them to go through shared parental leave, but the idea was like both of them were asking for maternity leave, and I couldn't say, because I wasn't an expert on this.
Yeah, and you could never have a situation where two people were entitled to maternity leave anyway. Yeah. That is never ever going to happen. I mean, in any, even, you know, if you've got an adoption situation or a male and a female couple, there's only one person that's ever going to be able to claim maternity leave. The other is it's going to be about paternity leave and shared parental leave.
Thank you. That is, at least it gives me something saying, no, you both cannot have it. It's one of you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yvonne, Sarah sent a message saying, for the employee undergoing IVF, how can the organisation manage their absence triggers to ensure there is support provided to the employee?
And I think that's a really, really good question, because technically there is no legal right to time off for fertility treatment, etc. So the law is kind of blind to all of that. But let's walk this through. If you had somebody who was pregnant and had to have time off during their pregnancy, you wouldn't be applying your absence triggers to them, because you're going to get yourself in real serious trouble if you do that because of the pregnancy situation. Now, whilst there's no legal protection in terms of rights to time off for fertility treatment, if we walk it through and you stack up someone's absence triggers because of fertility treatment, and then at some point in the future they then become pregnant, that's going to link together. And so you're at high risk of coming up against some kind of sex discrimination if you're not careful. So I would handle that one extremely carefully, because even though the legal rights to the time off for treatment aren't there, if you were to start penalising somebody for something that's happened, then I think you could end up in a bit of a sticky situation. But a lot will depend on individual circumstances. And I think if you're finding yourself having a problem, that something's become very difficult with an individual, then I think you need to take specific advice on that particular situation.
Has anyone got anything else they want to ask or share? There's nothing else in the chat box at the minute, Yvonne.
Okay. Well,
Can I ask a question? Sorry. If we want, I know that you recommended the signing up to the Fertility Workplace Pledge, but if we want to find out, is that the best place to look for more information if we want to do training for our line managers and things like that? where would you recommend?
So the Fertility Network pledge is basically it's more of a pledge to do things like that. But there are lots of organisations that can help. There's the Fertility Network, and we are going to after today, Joe is going to send out some further information to you all, which will contain a copy. There's going to be a recording of this, isn't there, Joe?
Yeah.
There will also be a link to a template fertility policy, and there'll also be some details of resources that you can refer to there as well. My contact details will also be there. So if somebody wants to ring me up for a quick chat for 10 minutes or 15 minutes or something like that, really happy to do that. But I think what's happening at the moment is the awareness around infertility is just starting to grow. So if we think back to 3 or 4 years ago, when I know I first started talking about menopause, and not many people were thinking about that at that point in time. Now suddenly everywhere you look, every employer is doing something about menopause. And I think this is a similar topic. I think this is a topic that is going to keep increasing because the rates of infertility are increasing. Now there's all sorts of reasons being thrown around about that, but it's whatever the cause is, it is increasing in the workplace. So there will be a lot more of this going on. So I think it is worthwhile as employers, you accessing the information and the resources that you can, and getting yourself geared up for dealing with these issues at work.
Yvonne, there's just a couple more things coming to the chat box. So Caroline's asked, if the embryo takes and they are pregnant but subsequently lose the baby and it is under 24 weeks, how much time legally would they be allowed?
So time to legally be allowed for what? Well, basically, the maternity, the statutory rights continue for 2 weeks after the loss of the baby. So if they do lose that baby before 24 weeks, then they have those 2 weeks afterwards.
Sorry, that was me, and I forgot to add on the end. How much time would they be allowed off? So we did actually give her. She was off for 3 weeks, and we actually gave her full pay. But I was just, but thing is, we don't have a policy, and it was the first time it's happened. So obviously, we wanted to be sympathetic. But I was just wondering, if it happened again, obviously we need a policy to be consistent. So I'm just wondering then, how much time legally, would someone be allowed off?
There isn't actually a legal amount of time off for that, unfortunately. I know there's lots of things going around at the moment in Parliament where people are trying to lobby for legal time off for this, but at this moment in time, that isn't covered. So most likely the time off that's usually being given to people in those circumstances is going to be compassionate leave, or quite frankly, if as an employer you don't offer somebody that kind of leave, then they're just going to go to the doctor and the doctor's just going to sign them off sick. I mean, that is the reality in it. And so, it's about, as an organisation, thinking about, do you, as an organisation, do you want people to go down the medical certification route for time off, for sickness absence, or would you rather give them some kind of compassionate leave in those circumstances?
Thank you.
Yvonne, there's another one. It says, does all the wording / legislation refer to infertility as single woman going through IVF or not infertile yet feel excluded?
Can you just say that again, Joe?
It says, does all the wording / legislation refer to infertility as single women going through IVF or not infertile yet feel excluded?
Ah, right, okay. Well, the bottom line is at this moment in time, there is no legislation in terms of the fertility rights from a workplace perspective anyway. So there isn't any. Whether there's particular legislation around treatments and things like that, I don't know. I'm not an expert in that area. What I look at is the workplace element of it. But I think this is about a fertility policy. And if as an employer you're going to look at a fertility policy, then to be truly inclusive, a fertility policy shouldn't just be about a couple, you know, a usual man and a woman. That fertility policy, really, to be truly inclusive, should cover single people. It should cover same-sex couples. It should cover trans people. So as a single person, whilst they may not be infertile, they have got fertility conception challenges, because the only way that, if you're talking about a single woman, the only way that she's going to get pregnant is either through a sperm donor or through, you know, an arrangement that is made. So it's whether you want to go as far as being specific about that in a policy, or just keeping the policy fairly broad to say that you will be supportive of all of those particular situations. Does that help?
Yeah, they've responded to say excellent answer. Thank you. Has anyone got anything else in there, or anyone want to ask anything else before we finish? I will be putting a message on LinkedIn to and then I'll be including that in the email. So if anyone wants copies of the handout that I've received from Vista, then if you pop a comment next to the LinkedIn post.
Apologies, is the slide still showing?
Yes.
I couldn't get the screen to stop sharing. Then it just wouldn't. It just would not click away. Apologies for that. Sorry.
Okay. Do you want me to do a close, Yvonne?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So obviously I've mentioned the email that I'll send through to everybody if you want a copy of the recording or the handout. Our next boardroom is called Happiness at Work, Is It Overrated? And that's next Wednesday, the 27th at 12:30. And a link to sign up is included in the email. We will also be sending out a short feedback survey to everyone that's registered for the event. So if you've got a spare couple of minutes to complete it, then this will be much appreciated. If anyone is recruiting, we've also got accountancy recruit, FD recruit and executive recruit within our group. Otherwise, I'd just like to say thanks very much to Yvonne for your time and effort in putting the session together, and also to everybody for signing in. Is there anything else that you would like to add, Yvonne?
No, just thank you so much for being here this morning, and thank you very much for those questions, because I think they were really good questions. So thank you very much for asking them.
Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you soon.